Hi everyone, I'm Laura, curator of exhibitions here at the M, and we are excited to be launching the 1.5 exhibition, 1.5, a Southeast Asian Diaspora Remix, and I'm delighted to be here with Chanida, the executive director of SEED. Welcome, Chanida.
Yes, I'm so excited. It's been a years long making for the 1.5 show, hashtag 1.5. You can follow us on social media to get the latest, but we do have a website for the show. It's at theseedproject.org/1.5. So the SEED Project, aka Southeast Asian Diaspora Project, is a community-based organization in North Minneapolis, and our main mission is to grow social empowerment ecosystems through cultural organizing, critical language, and just storytelling. And we do that through workshops and events and different programming that really gets at the heart of the issues and themes and experiences and cultures of Vietnamese, Hmong, Khmer, Lao, and others from the region.
So the 1.5 exhibition was something we initially imagined as sort of a traditional exhibition that you would have gone into a gallery to see. And as a result of COVID, we had to change our plans, and pretty quickly, which was a complicated process. But as a result, there is now what I like to describe as an art experience that you can access entirely from public space. So the experience starts at 350 Robert Street, the museum's entrance in downtown St. Paul, and it circles around the building. You can pop into the building, and there's an installation in the Skyway that you should check out if you're cold, if you need a coffee, and then pop back out, and the exhibition continues along 4th Street, running along the Green Line.
Saturday, September 26th, we're inviting the public to come out and pick up on Robert Street the zines. We have some other goodie giveaways and other things that are happening, so everybody can come on down, but it will be a drive-through type of situation. So you're just driving through, open your window at the spots that we have staff and volunteers at, and get your zine. So on Thursday, October 8th at 6:30 p.m. we'll be having a really great, robust conversation with the M, SEED, and our artists. And then you can also check on our website again to see what the lineup is. We have a pretty packed event schedule.
When I think about SEED does a lot of different work, but one of the primary methods of working is through storytelling. And one of the things that is really clear in this exhibition is that the stories we tell really matter. And there's something really poetic about SEED's name. Of course, it stands for something specific, the Southeast Asian Diaspora, but it also suggests all these beautiful metaphors. And the way you've talked about stories as seeds that connect people across generations. Can you say a little bit more about that?
So stories give people hope, and we know that hope dies last, and so I think that's what's being said with this show, is that there's hope, there's survivors in the face of destruction and how many thousands have perished, that we still have our stories that we hold on to, and how those stories get passed on to the next generation is what's critical here with this show. It's deeply personal, right? It's deeply personal to me and the people who grew up with similar lived experiences, but that we're tired, right? We're tired of talking about the war. We don't want to just talk about a commemoration. We want to talk about how we're thriving and surviving, in a really fresh and also artistic way. We come from a long history of beautiful art It's just that we didn't get a chance to hold on to those things. They were either taken or erased from us, right? And so now we're kind of reviving that. And so there's kind of a bit of a renaissance going on, I would say. And I think it's a beautiful time to do so. Originally, what had happened when I first started Seed in 2011 was we're planting the seeds of hope and possibility. You know, we don't want this to be another like acknowledgement, reflection about the escape stories and, you know, the things that make us sad and, you know, and the trauma that continues to resurface. But not to say that that's not important, but I think what's really striking about these artists and the works that they created is that they're getting at the heart of how humans have always responded during times of crisis and chaos, and I think that speaks across the board.
So this is really top of mind for me in connecting to this idea that the stories we really tell matter. Recently listening to an interview with the Vietnamese-American writer Ocean Vuong, and he was talking about the fact that if you've gone through the American education system, you have probably been exposed to all of 3 pages about the Vietnam War, and they're often pages filled with bodies. There's more history about George Washington and him cutting down the cherry tree than there is about the Vietnam War. And so many Americans don't even know about the secret war in Laos. So this show plays a really important role in just educating about basic history that many Americans don't know.
So what we're saying with this show and the storytelling campaign is that we're disrupting that mainstream narrative, right? So it's not about Rambo and the Ken Burns documentary anymore. It still is, but I think that Americans in general are so stuck to that mainstream narrative. It's really hard. They're conditioned to think that there's a certain narrative about the Vietnam War and what had happened there. But we know historically that it's always been Southeast Asian voices that were erased or not the main focal point of those stories that are being told, you know? And so I think this show is saying, like, hey, we are more than our trauma. It is a part of our experience. That's not something we want to erase or ignore, but that we want to talk about this differently this year. How can we really dig deeper into what history should be teaching and informing people today? And it's in the systems that we are operating in, right? It's the reasons why George Floyd had happened. It's the reasons why we still have refugees and immigrants being deported, right? And that really speaks to that. And I think that's something that isn't being talked about. We're here to stay. These are our lived experiences, but also in a way where we're pulling narratives visually and through the stories. And as you see, we are balancing some of the snippets and pull quotes from the stories into the show and connecting that to the visual elements such as refugee photos. We weren't meant to survive, you know, in America as refugees and in the diaspora. If you notice where we've been plopped in, we're plopped in the ghettos and in some of the hardest neighborhoods across America. And it's very, it's a beautiful struggle to go through. And so those are what you're seeing in the show is a lot of those moments of growing up in these various worlds and in poverty with little resources, little things to eat, and also how we've carried culture into this new context. To Americans and those who are not part of the Southeast Asian diaspora and just anyone who's been displaced really, is that stories are so much more important to us because it's the only thing that we carry. Sometimes that's all that we have, right? When we move from one place to a new home. And so that's why for the Seed Project, for me, storytelling is just at the core of not only who we are as people, but that it's what keeps us surviving and thriving in many ways.
I want to thank everyone for joining us for this virtual launch. We're really excited about the show and to have you experience this really powerful project. So come and check it out in person, pick up a zine, an activity book. We've got lots of different ways that you can engage. I also want to thank Chanida for joining us today and also for sharing your beautiful vision.
Yes, thanks for having me. I'm so excited for this partnership and the 1.5 show. And I invite everybody to come out and check out the exhibit and make sure you bring your family and friends, pick up a zine, a map, and go for a stroll.
Of course, we have to mention that a project like this does not happen with individual working alone. It takes a lot of people, and in this case, two really hardworking teams, both at the M and at Seed, working collaboratively to organize this show. So we want to shout out to all the folks who worked on the show. You can find information about the staff at Seed and at the M on each organization's websites. So this is a wrap on our first virtual opening ever. Thank you again and have a good evening.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for tuning in. My name is Mia Laufer, and I am the curatorial assistant at the M. Before we get started, I want to acknowledge that the Minnesota Museum of American Art is within the traditional territory of the Dakota, here in Imni-Zaska, now known as St. Paul, a place name which refers to the white bluffs along the river. And now it is my pleasure to introduce tonight's speakers. Chanida Potter is a Lao American writer, activist, and community development strategist. She is the executive director of the Seed Project, an organization based in Minnesota and Laos aimed at empowering Southeast Asian diaspora communities through language and storytelling. Chanida is also the curator of the exhibition 1.5, a Southeast Asian Diaspora Remix, now on view at the M through January 2021. She is joined tonight by Kalia Yang, an award-winning Hmong-American writer who has received way too many literary and community leadership awards for me to even list now. She is the author of the memoirs The Late Homecomer, a Hmong family memoir, and The Song Poet. And The Song Poet has been commissioned as a youth opera at the Minnesota Opera and will premiere in the spring of 2021. Yang is also the author of several children's books, and she has 2 titles coming out this fall. The first is The Most Beautiful Thing, and the second is called Somewhere in the Unknown World, a collective refugee memoir. So I encourage everyone to order an advance copy as soon as possible. So now, without further ado, I'll turn the mic over to Chanida and Kalia.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for having us. I'm delighted to be here with Chanida and to be in conversation with her and to celebrate the very exciting 45th anniversary of the Southeast Asian Diaspora.
Yes, how are you, Kalia? And hi, everyone, for joining. So yeah, Kalia, it's been a while since I've seen you. And I know 2020 has been quite the year, as we all know. And, you know, unfortunately, we are also commemorating for our 45th during such a heavy and challenging time in COVID era. So, you know, what's really coming to focus for you?
Well, as a writer, you know, we're in the pandemic, but I'm also releasing new books. In June, I had a book come out that I think is a lovely book, but without the face-to-face interactions, you know, it's hard to get traction. And then soon I have another children's book, and then November 10th, I have my a much longer adult collective memoir coming out. So doing the good work that I believe in at this time where so much movement is limited has been tricky, to say the least. I've had to rely on, of course, technology, but also relationships, the relationships that I've cultivated in my work as a writer. But I think in many ways that symbolize so many of our work as a community, you know, in the last 45 years, and I know this is definitely true for you and your work, Chanida. We've had to cultivate lots of relationships to survive and to grow. And this is a time where those relationships are all coming into light and coming into play.
Right. I think for me, a lot of lessons learned from our elders and what has been passed down to us as children of refugees too have come into focus. And so we're talking about grief and survival, resilience. And some have said, you know, this is kind of our superpower. So, and usually every commemoration year, there's always discussion around success stories or how far we've come. I mean, where do you feel like that conversation needs to head for as we reflect on the 45th and, you know, eventually the 50th?
I love your suggestion of the 50th because it means that no matter what happens in early November, that we will all survive and that we'll still be here to celebrate the 50th. It's a very optimistic and hopeful, I think, possibility that you're asking me to imagine. In terms of the future, I have a lot of hopes and a lot of dreams. I'm a mother. I have 3 little ones, you know, identical twin boys who are 5 and a little girl who's 7. They are a part of that future. In 5 years, it's so easy for me to imagine where they will be in terms of personhood, but also in terms of identity. You know, I have interracial kids. I'm raising them in St. Paul because this is home to the biggest, you know, urban Hmong population in the country, in the world. And so when I imagine them 5 years from now, it's a really beautiful image. When I think back to the last 45 years, I think about my mom and my dad. I think about my refugee parents. I think about how now they're living in a house and a life that they couldn't have envisioned. Yes, there's a pandemic. None of us saw that coming, really, except my dad did a little bit before the general Americans. He listens to Radio Free Asia. And when the news started coming, my dad was saying to all of us, we need to be careful. You need to go buy rice. You have to, like, you know, something is coming and it's serious. And I think that is because he's worked so hard, not only to keep himself alive, but to keep all of us alive. And to see this sickness coming, he understood that there was nowhere and no room to run, that we would have to face it. And he wanted us to be as prepared as possible. These are just some of the wisdoms that I think all of our parents walked from that war with. You know, the same thing happened when Donald Trump was elected in 2016 and the instances of racially motivated crimes went up. My parents were more prepared than any of us were in how to respond, how to deal. And here I'll speak very specifically. You know, of course, right now we're in the wake of the trial, you know, the charges against Breonna Taylor's murderers. But in 2016, my dad and I came upon a gas station where there was a man with a gun, foaming at the mouth, holding it to these 4 African-American kids. And I thought I was going to record it, but my fingers were shaking so much I couldn't maneuver around my cell phone. But what my father did there was, in my mind, incredible. He drove right in between the gun and the kids, and he told them to run. You know, and once they did, we drove out of that gas station. But that was my first instance that war that had done so much, that had given my mom and dad some survival instincts that I myself didn't have. You know, that they could act and think coherently in a situation where I couldn't. And so there are these advantages, if you will, to that horrible experience. When we survive, we become stronger, and we are the children of survivors, and that's become more upfront to me. What about you?
Yeah, you know, I've been thinking about Breonna Taylor on my mind since news broke out of the decision this week, and I'm still grappling with, you know, where do we begin, you know, and the heaviness of what our communities have to deal with, and what can we do to move forward in a way where there's transformation, there's justice, and it's helped me think about the world that we're stepping into and the world that we need to create so that women like Breonna Taylor don't have to go through this, and her family. And so I just wonder, what that world looks like. And I think we're trying to build that world together in many ways, right? And so, I think the diasporas too, we're kind of there, we're continuously, as we live together and, be in communities together, we're constantly in this, there's that battle with our memories and how we're constantly at war, and we're still at war because that's what trauma does, and I really worry about our current generation as well, around how we're grappling with trauma and how that gets passed down, and what are our children going to hold from us, and also this pandemic, and I don't know, I think some, especially for Americans in general, there is this current generation where there's some events that maybe once in a while there's a huge crisis, and now we've had quadruple the crises within a short time frame, and it's so the impact of trauma is real. So what does that mean? What does that mean for us? And I think that's what we're trying to have conversations around. But yeah, what do you feel like? What are some conversations we need to be having right now that we're not having?
With the coronavirus, and the president calling it the Chinese virus, I think you and me and members of our respective communities, our communal communities, are facing racism in an entirely different way. When I think about trauma, I often think about this moment when my father offers me his hand. My dad spent most of his life in America as a machinist in the factories, so he has incredibly rough hands. I have the soft hands of a writer. My dad often, he likes to say, from hardness you can give birth to gentleness. And I always think immediately of our hands and the work that we've done here in America. He polished metal into shine, and I'm creating stories from memories. There is a beauty there. There's a choice there. There are these things that I'm choosing to do with my life that my mom and dad and that generation could never have done. When I think about this moment right here, right now, I think about my response to it. I think about the things I'm writing into the world. I think about the things that I'm saying into the world. I think about the choices that I can make about the individual I want to be. And I think about how that generation had no choice, how my mom and dad had no choice in the jungles of Laos, in the refugee camps of Thailand, in the housing projects of St. Paul. And I feel like it is, for all that it is worth, it is a blessing, that I get to make these choices and I get to be who I want to be in this moment, this historical moment. I think often about coals and diamonds and how they're both carbon, but how the diamond has been exposed to so much that it's become so hardened. In that hardness, there's so much beauty, so much shine. And sometimes I think that's who we are. We become who we are because of the hard things. And that has been a great source of inspiration for me in this dark time, which is to say this. I think we're not talking often enough about our inspirations. At this moment in time, when we talk about Southeast Asians, when we talk about the diaspora, we're not talking about the reasons why we celebrate, the reasons why we continue, the reasons why we find and we are sometimes sources of beauty for each other and for the bigger world around us, which is in many ways fitting because that is the realm of art.
Yeah, that's right. I've been thinking about how my mother, as you were talking about rice, her refugee habits around hoarding. So she's been going to the supply drives, getting all kinds of things or packing our pantry to the rim. And I've been thinking about how she has done this her whole life. There's nothing that I can do about it. There's nothing that she can do about it. But the thing that's funny, and I'll tell a funny story, is that she, one day, it was during the earlier, sorry, that's my children, of course. It was a few months ago when she, our fridge was like overpacked, and she has been asking for a second freezer for like the longest time. And then I said, no, Mom, we're never gonna do it. We will never have a second fridge. And then last month, I bought a second fridge because there are some things when so I said in my head, oh, Mom was right. Like, we may balk at their refugee habits in some ways, or may not understand it, but it has helped. It has helped with times when the uprisings were happening and there was no way for us to go get them to the nearest grocery store, or things were all closed around us, right? And as you know, with the uprisings in our cities, it was a time where her trauma and the things that she automatically went to as a refugee came into surface, and so I've learned so much through this process. And another thing is how much storytelling was a crucial part of her healing. So she, during those long nights, she shared a lot of stories with my kids and I, and then started cooking as well. And I think about how it feels so familiar that she may have done this to me too, right, when I was a child. And it's just so beautiful to see. And those are things that I, take for granted and think about as well. But yeah, like you said, we're not talking about those inspirations and those lessons as much, and how we have always been resilient, but also how we are using our imagination to actually carve a different world for ourselves and our children in many ways. And so that's what I'm appreciative of the art and the stories. And, for you, it's the children's stories too. So I would love to hear, how have you went from a memoir to children's books too now. So like, how have you addressed some of the, these issues in a context of, in a children's mind? What does that look like? Mm-hmm.
So I wrote The Late Homecomer, and I started writing that book when I was 22 years old. It came out when I was 27. And then I followed that up with the song Poet, a memoir of my father. And then Shannon, Gibney, and I, we put forth a collection. You can hear my child as well, I'm sure. We put together a collection, What God Has Honored Here, Writings on Miscarriage and Infant Loss by and for Native women and women of color. Because despite the fact that miscarriage and infant loss happened disproportionately to Native women and women of color in this country, there was nothing literally by or for us, reflecting and representing our experiences. And of course, when you begin to think about this deeply and begin to look at the historical patterns, you see that in this country, there's been a long relationship with women and the children that were taken. In the Native American context, there were the Indian schools. In the context of the African American, there's, slavery. In the Hmong context specifically, and it's the same for Lao, there were the boy and the girl soldiers that the Central Intelligence Agency of the United States of America recruited to fight and to die on America's behalf. Right now at our borders, there are children in cages. This is not a conversation that America feels comfortable embarking on, reckoning with. And so that book came out, and that is of course a very heavy book. It's a collection, so there's like 24 voices in there, women from across the nation speaking to their experiences very intimately, and then of course politically, because what is intimate is ultimately political. And so I started thinking a lot more about children's literature. I have children and I read to them all the time, but very few books even now reflect our experiences as Southeast Asians, as Hmong folk. And so I decided to say out loud at some talk for a library event, I said, I want to do children's literature. I came home and there were 2 emails from 2 different editors saying, somebody said you want to do children's literature. But of course I didn't know. You know, most children's books are 32 pages. It's 32 pages to do the work from front to end. So I had to study. And thankfully Carol Hinds, my editor at Learner, with Carol wrote a book. She was there and she, you know, we did intensive on the children's book. What happens when a page flips, right? And then my children became my test subjects. I told them stories all the time, but I started putting the words on pages and started reckoning with that. A Map into the World came out last year. It's almost a year old only, but it feels like it's been in my life for much longer than that. And there's been the Shared Room. And on October 3rd, we will launch at the Walker virtually, of course, the most beautiful thing. And I think that it's a glorious collaboration between myself, the team at Learner, and Kwale, a Vietnamese artist. And then, of course, Somewhere in the Unknown World, my November book, is a book for adults. I'm not leaving the world of adult literature behind. I'm going to grow in both. I'm my mother's daughter, Chanida. When my mom sits on a chair and when the chair is too high, she starts swinging her legs. When I was younger, I thought, how childish. One day I'm going to sit very regally. And then you grow up and you realize, I'm my mother's daughter. You know, the fact that she swings her legs doesn't make her childish. It brings out a different facet of who she is. It doesn't take away from the woman sitting there. And that is who I am becoming. And I'm really proud of this fact. I love the fact that I'm working in both children's literature and adult, and I'm writing middle grade and young adult right now. And so, you know, the dream is becoming. I'm going to become a writer that a child can grow up with and an adult can grow old with. What about you? I know that your work, yes, you are the executive director of SEED, but you're also a writer and your work is also so multifaceted.
Yeah, you know, I've been telling people I've become this accidental storyteller because, you know, as children, we didn't have a choice. We had to advocate for things that happened or that happened to our parents, right? Or injustices that we saw growing up in some of the most, you know, heavily traumatized, heavily policed neighborhoods. And so, you know, I've been writing. I have not been writing very well. I bet you Brian Tawara would point at me and say, finish your book. So that's been ingrained in my head too. But, you know, we have amazing Southeast Asian writers like yourself to help pave the way. And I appreciate how much we're able to actually finally tell our stories on our own terms. And so we at SEED, we did an anthology in 2018 called Planting Seeds. And it was the first, you know, kind of Southeast Asian, maybe do a fact check, double check, I think we are, the first Southeast Asian authored anthology of stories in Minnesota. And so we collected 20 stories, 5 from the Hmong, Khmer, Lao, and Vietnamese communities here. And since then, our elders, a few of our elders from that anthology have passed. And something that sticks with me is how some of their children have reached out about how grateful they are that somehow their parents' stories were captured, and how necessary it is for them to be able to have something documented about their family story and origins, so that they can pass it on to their children. And these were stories that the children themselves may have never heard of, or their parents never shared with them. So that's become my kind of calling, I guess you could say, is just being able to gather the narratives and from our communities and put that into focus and helping them get voice and visibility, so that they feel not only empowered, but when we're reframing their stories in a way that they feel heard and seen, the type of light that comes out of them, because they're able to either let go or move on, becomes a part of their healing journey, you know. And I realize how healing-centered storytelling has become pivotal to our work, you know. And so, yeah, so that's kind of where we're at. And then somehow I started curating shows, and then here we are. We have an art show. It's open today. It's been a couple years long process, and we were planning for this to be indoors. And unfortunately, with COVID, we've had to reimagine what that looks like. So now it's a window facing show from the street. And, we've had to scrap some original ideas and rethink about how certain artworks need to show. And, I think one of the artists, Sisavan Putavong, had mentioned how now it's fascinating to see our art behind glass, behind something that also feels distant for us as Southeast Asians, and also feels familiar, with how we are plastered on walls of museums in many ways too. So that resonated with me when she shared that too. But yeah, so, well, it looks like we have some questions, some burning questions. One is from Zay Chang, I believe. They asked, I would love to know, how has addressing issues of cultural loss, war, and trauma through art and storytelling been healing? What do you think?
So for me, and this is only one example of how it's been so helpful, but in collecting the stories of other women and what God has honored here, what I learned when I cried for other people's losses was that I wasn't alone. I was in community, and that in fact, we'd always been in community, we just didn't know it, but we did know it, but we hadn't reckoned with it. And I think that is the true gift of art and of literature, of storytelling, that when we share each other's stories, we carry them for each other, and that burden becomes lighter. We can go further and faster. That's been my truth of stories. It's there are no shortcuts out of emotions. I'm not saying that through the art of writing that you come out and the tears have dried. They don't, but they fall, and they fall together. And that is how you build love, and you foster vulnerability as a strength in the world that we live in. So often as refugees and new Americans, we have to be strong. We have to present our strongest face, our best feet forward to be recognized or to be seen as somehow worthy. I am of the mind and the heart that we don't need to do that. That these tears are falling for a reason. And in fact, you have a responsibility for them, the traumas of war, what's happening here in this country, that these facts of miscarriage and infant loss happen disproportionately to Native women and women of color. And when I talk about women of color, I should be specific. Most of the studies are about African-American women and African-American women's, mortality. But nobody does research on refugee women. So our real numbers, nobody knows, right? All we know is that we live in these same communities, the hardest hit communities with crime, with the racial disparities. And in my own experiences, I've seen it all around me, but that's what happens for me when I share these stories. When I meet them in the world, I am less alone. I am made stronger by it, because the people living these stories live still. And that is inspiring. That is hopeful for me.
That's right. There's something about living histories that we forget, that we're not stagnant, or we're not stuck in a certain time too. So someone had asked, how do we create work about our trauma without it being voyeuristic? So how do we as creatives avoid contributing to trauma porn? What do you think?
There is in me a stubborn refusal to be easily categorized. When we talk, and I'm going to run away with the miscarriage and infant loss, nobody wants to know about how gory it is. Nobody wants to know about how you push out a dead baby into the world. In America, it's cloaked in the language of angels. In America, in this grief-averse society that we live in, sometimes people refuse to look and to see what is there, what exists there. And so sometimes that's part of the work that I have to do as a writer. And it wouldn't matter what kind of trauma I was coming from. That's important for me to say. But the truth is that I also, sometimes people will say, Kalia's work is so sad. No, people, Kalia's work is so filled with love. The fact that she sits there and that she writes and that her name is on these books is an achievement. The fact that the people in the stories have somehow carried them forward and conveyed them to her, brought her tears to the surface, and that as a reader I can cry with her is an achievement. It's an achievement of empathy. It is an achievement of skill, of craft. It is an achievement of humanity, that these things are possible in the world that we live in. Sentenced to death here are the Hmong doing this work. Same with the Laos, same with the Vietnamese, right? Sentenced to death, here we are in this country. Not only are we, looking at the ways you are telling our stories and critiquing them, we are responding creatively. We're responding from these vessels of courage and heart. It takes so much damn heart, and I think because we're looking at the fullness of the picture, right? It isn't trauma porn. It isn't just me talking about how sad I am about the world, right? It isn't pitiful. It is passionate. And I want to say this clearly. It is passionate, and it is sometimes hard. But it is an achievement to be able to look at something, to make that sun shine longer so that the darkness will, can't touch me yet. You can't touch me yet until the shadows become my friend. To be able to make these moves on the page means I'm claiming time, I'm claiming space. And these things are all, and you have to keep your perspective, or you will get lost in it. And when you are among the trees and you're no longer aware that there's a jungle around you, that's when it's easy to fall into these easy traps of a mainstream society and mainstream standards for your art and your expression.
Yeah, that's right. Some of the things that I think about too is there's a lot of, well, how do we not just only talk about trauma in our work and our art, and but part of it is it's part of our identity. It's part of our history. That's something that we also can't ignore in many ways. It's something that seemingly has to be reminded too sometimes for people. So it's a way to also explore kind of vital perspectives, in terms of how we navigate kind of the war that is in our mind that we're dealing with too in many ways. So I want to talk about I didn't mention this before, but 1.5 generation, which were part of this generation as children who arrived on American soil, from Laos too. And it was right before the internet age, and so now we're all about social media. Even streaming this through social media is so odd, right? And it's such a chaotic age right now. And I think about how growing up, when I grew up in North Minneapolis, I was surrounded around hip hop culture in predominantly Black neighborhoods, and other folks, wherever they may be plopped in as refugees, what they had to grow up with. So we're talking about Rambo, Valley Girls, MTV, Star Wars and whatnot. What is some memories from that you remember, kind of like your first few moments of, oh, this is how you be American? Is this how, so that's something I'm thinking about, and what this, I think, exhibit is kind of showcasing is there's this in-betweenness as 1.5, where you're literally in multiple worlds at once, whether you're inside the home with Lao or Hmong culture, and outside the home in all of this with hip hop, punk rock, or rock and roll kind of a thing. Yeah.
I have lovely memories of my older cousins. They were good at it. They could raise their bangs with hairspray, but I could not do it. I have very clear memories of, visiting my older cousins, and they're listening to Bryan Adams, right? Waiting for You. And then they're also listening to Thai pop and, Chinese pop, and the whole of the world for the refugee child is so much more international than anybody ever credits us for. Before certain trends make it to America, I'm already seeing it on Thai dramas, okay? I'm already seeing it on K-dramas. There are Bollywood. Bollywood was huge, in my home. And so all of these art from around the world that had made its way to the refugee camp, that makes its way to America because of my refugee-ness. I think about all of this in lieu of starter jackets and Gerbo jeans. When hot Cheetos came into being, I was already old, but I wish I was young and I could enjoy them the way I might have enjoyed them then. There are all of these memories that come flooding, and these are colorful memories. These are memories that, push and test against the fabric of what is and isn't Hmong. in America, or Lao in America, Cambodian, all of these notions of who we are, right? It's this 1.5 identity. And I love it because it's been the bridge. Because of that gift, I'm still fluent in Hmong. I belong to a time and a place when the language has seeped in through my ears and entered my heart before America couldn't push it out. And I think that is so true of the way I see the world and the way I interface with it.
Yeah, that's right. We've navigated these spaces in a way where we've picked up a couple superpowers, with living in so many multiple worlds. And in many ways, I call this time traveling. We literally are kind of time traveling, between different generations, and being able to hold a language that holds so much culture, so much history and peoplehood, is something that doesn't get lost on me too. I can't imagine the erasure of that, and not having that, and so it's coming to focus for me with my children, kind of what gifts do I want to pass on to them too with this. And so grandma, is like the greatest teacher for this. And so no matter what sort of schools that, we can put them in, it's nothing like just leaving them home with grandma and grandpa to teach them about their traditions, their culture, and their mother tongue, so it's been beautiful to see. So some of the questions are coming in asking, how did you find your life's purpose? Such a big question. How did you overcome any doubts as a creative writer, especially Southeast Asian? Yeah. What do you think?
Like lots of us, I think, watching, and like you and me here, our parents came to America knowing that doctors and lawyers were needed, right? Doctors heal what's broken in the body, lawyers protect us, from the rights we've never had enough of. But such a thing as a writer. I became a writer because of love. I became a writer because I had a grandma who never went to school. She couldn't read or write. She signed her name with a shaky X that stood in for Hlee all of my life with her. When she died, her biggest fear was that she would be forgotten. And I've always been a lover of story, but the fact that I could pursue a life in it, wasn't immediately clear to me. It wasn't until I was on page 37 of a love letter to my grandma, where my father says to me, if you dream in the right direction, the dreamer never wakes up, the dream never dies, it always grows bigger and bigger, that the idea dawned, what if I could write this into a book? What if the world could love Jolie along with me? It was this love that channeled me into being. When I was younger, I used to think that one day maybe an asteroid would hit the Earth, and in its wake, I would know exactly who I was meant to be. But then at some point along the way, I realized I've already been who I need to be. Part of it is about doing the daily work of learning and growing in this world, that no one was right. For every force, there's an equal and opposite reaction. Now, with that said, from the moment I decided that I would become a writer, it's always been my it to my all. There's no contingency plans in Kao Kalia Yang's life. I've been now at this for 16 years. I'm 39. I'm heading toward the last months of of my 30s, and this has been the one thing that I passionately and persistently chased. Which doesn't mean that I didn't acquire skills along the way. I'm a gifted translator. I am, of course, faculty with the University of Minnesota right now in the School of Writing, so the MFA program. I've acquired skills along the way, but it has always been the writing that makes possible everything else. And I think that that's important for me to say about the arts. If you want it, you have to give it your all. It will take nothing less. There has to be no contingency plans. Otherwise, you will be an artist and a lot of other things. If it is your heart's calling, as I feel it is mine, then every day I come up with one more reason to become a better writer in the world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm with you on that. I think to answer that question too is sometimes you think of just art and writing in general as like a hobby, a side thing, something we do on the weekends, which yes, we do that too. But I do think that people do have to see it as part of the very living and breathing thing. It's a practice that you have to really put in the hours, put in the just doing. and creating in order to see what flourishes from it. You know, and so that's definitely true, especially for us, right? Like as writers from when we were younger, maybe in our 20s, is completely different to how we are now, you know, and looking back at it, you see how much you have grown and how much over time with practice and consistent, like, you know, late night hours and hours, it seems to be, you know, kind of the way that we have moved in terms of as creatives in this world. So that's definitely true. Well, I know we have only a few minutes left. Doesn't look like we have any other questions, except for me specifically. Why is it important not to only feature Southeast Asian artists, but also Southeast Asian curators? So this is important. And this is kind of also how SEED has been able to partner with the M, and the M has been a really important and pivotal partner to us in just allowing us to have space in our own way. And that's been really a really great moment for us to say we can occupy and claim the space as ours and not have a curator who may be white tell us how it needs to look, tell us how the art needs to be, you know? And so I think that that's been quite an achievement itself in many ways here. And so I hope everybody gets to go out and enjoy it. It's at the Minnesota Museum of American Art. And I think our team is dropping in links in there in case you need to find out where it's at. But it's in downtown St. Paul. And it's open from today through the end of January, thankfully. So you have all fall and winter to check it out and give us feedback or anything that comes up for you. And the biggest thing for us is to make sure that stories continue to be shared. So whatever memories or stories come up for you as you're looking through this art, please do let us know and share that with us. We would love to have that. So I know before we go, I would love to hear maybe a short snippet from one of your books, Kalia, that you could share as part of our closing. Would that be possible? Pull out one of your 100 books, please.
So I have my children's books closest to me, and before I do the reading, I want to say thank you, Chanida, and to SEED and to the for putting together this exhibit. Yes, we are who we are, but it is so beautiful to see pieces of ourselves reflected in a space like downtown, in a place like St. Paul, in Minnesota, America still. So thank you for your work, and thank you for having me this evening. I will read from A Map into the World, and I'll read the very ends. So this book is inspired by real life. I had a neighbor named Bob who lost his wife when we moved in, and he was often very sad. Sometimes he would sit out there on the special bench by himself and he would weep. And so it became a habit to cross that street and to talk to him. Anybody who crossed that street would be immediately an angel. And so we went there often. And one particularly sad day, my daughter and her cousins had an idea, and this is that idea. I pulled on my mother's sleeve until she looked at me. I whispered an idea in her ear. My mother and I crossed the street and walked over to Bob. I let the sidewalk chalk bucket swing in my hands. I asked my mother to ask Bob if I could draw on his driveway. I said, if he doesn't like it, the rain will come and wash it away. Bob nodded and said, go ahead. My mother and Bob talked in low voices. I could hear Bob say, Ruth, she was with me for 60 years. I started my picture with a teardrop, and then I made it splatter like sunshine. I drew lines leading away from the splattered sun in many directions. I drew a line that led to the garden. There I put a yellow ginkgo leaf. I drew a line that led to the grass. There I made the sparkling snow. I drew a line that led to the sidewalk. There I put a smiling worm named Annette. I drew an arrow to our house. There I added lilac flowers. And then I drew a line, the biggest line of all, toward the street. And there I drew the whole world. When I was done, I walked quietly to my mother and to Bob. They stopped talking and Bob shook my hand. "What did you draw for me?" he asked. I said in a whisper, "A map into the world, just in case you need it." Bob said, "I think I might." And I think this is a perfect place to end on, that are maps in the world that it could show others in need of direction at this time. And that the beauty in our heart, these are the things that allow us to cross the streets of our lives, all of the many streets of our lives. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Kalia. That was beautiful. Again, to wrap up, please make sure you grab Kalia's books, A Map into the World, The Shared Room, and The Most Beautiful Thing, which are all out or coming out. So we'll drop the link in the chat box. And then at this time, I would love to invite our communities out to take a look at our exhibit. It's all COVID-friendly outdoors. We have 2 events coming up we would love to invite everybody to. And those events are on actually this Saturday, September 26th. From 1 to 3, we have a scattered zine pickup. So get a free zine. And then we also have a free hand sanitizer and a free Planting Seeds t-shirt. So it's pretty much first come, first serve. So make sure you go pick that up at 350 Robert Street North in downtown St. Paul at the museum entrance. And then please do join us with our artists, with some of our select artists, lead artists on October 8th. And that is a Thursday at 6:30 p.m. And that is our artist talk with a group of artists and with our moderator, Renee Ya, based in California, who will be moderating the conversation with me as well. And so I invite everybody to that. And in the meantime, please reach out and use hashtag 1.5. And I hope we get to commemorate during a year that we know that art is healing and that art is necessary. And I hope everybody continues to keep telling their stories in their own words. So thank you so much, Kalia. And thanks to the M and the C team and everybody for making this happen. We will see you at the show. Thank you so much. Bye.
Check it out, give me my spec. 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 Check it out.
With a legal mask and distinctive path, I choose boom bap, or rather it chose me. Now my soul bleeds first steps when my words left me turned in haiku. Life through vinyl, it's soul survival when my mind's full. On the verge of second thought, to save some time, my second start to grow some patience. If you could grow some love now and show it back to maintenance, I'd appreciate it.
Reality bites as I stepped on toes like it's my turn to go. I deserve more than a handshake, a package of ho-hos and a view of the landscape. That's escapism. Chantel, I am Chicago in places. Northside is where I rest with all the different faces. Stand still while your style stay basic. Adidas with fat laces, Timberlands for your friends, but it all depends. Cause the meaning of every word is defined by its context, but context is always flowing, so therefore the meaning of every word I speak is always changing, always flowing in respect.
Give me my spec. Check it out, give me my spec.
Respect.
Check it